Spin me a dream woven silver and gold, from sunshine and shadows and days long ago, where people are memories and stories unfold.
Greetings, Uncle Travelling Matt here, and I am doing the final vlog of my walk along St. Frideswides Way. Day 5 from Pangbourne to Reading, and it was a Sunday, so I started late because I went to church with my friend Alex in the morning in Iffley. Wonderful church that I visited earlier on the path, but it is always I enjoyed the services there. It's a good place, and afterwards you go for a cup of tea in the church hall, which I think is an old tithe barn. It's a wonderful old building. So yeah, that's that. But yeah, it started off quite a sunny day, and I parked up in the village. I guess it's a village, not a town, of Pangbourne, and then walked through the high street, stopped off at a nice little eatery for a bit of egg on toast, and then continued on my way. All along the road again, the river is completely flooded, and I have to say this has probably been one of the most boring days of walking that I've ever done on any pilgrimage. Outside of Pangbourne there was half a mile, maybe a mile at most, of fields, and then it was into the suburbs of Reading, and the rest of it was in Reading, and about 6 miles walking all told, through suburbia, a lot of it. So what is there to report on it? Well, a few points. The red kites were there in great number again, and on the way I stepped in a pub, the Pond House it was called, and a complete opposite of the other pubs I've been going to, because I talked about my gastro pub experience before, and in the Trout, where they were basically high-end restaurants masquerading as pubs. This was a pub, and it showed the two sides of Britain, and I guess today's walk, that's what it demonstrated, is that we are a very, very divided country, and a lot of this, people might think Reading is a wealthy town. Is it a town or a city? Town, I'll say, and it is, I guess, being quite close to London, but there are some real working class areas, and I walked through them, and this Pond House was, yeah, it was a working class pub. I mean, it wasn't a very good pub in terms of the beer. They had no hand pulls, and and so I ended up having a shandy with electric John Smith, which is not great, but it was friendly, and there was an atmosphere, and it was everything that the others weren't, both good and bad. So, where their food was excellent, this didn't do food. Where their beer was amazing, this didn't, the beer was awful. But what it did have was the atmosphere and the community thing. The football was playing. And, yeah, it's strange, because in many ways this walk has been a walk through the old England, but it's been very modern, and it's been a country that is quite alien to me. This, even though I was down south and I'm from up north, was the England that I know, and it was pretty messy, pretty nondescript, but down to earth, kind of working class. Also very multi-ethnic. So Oxford Road, which is what I walked along, after the Pond House, becomes that kind of, immigrant street sort of thing, where all the immigrant shops are, and the eateries and all that, and it's that, like Soho Road in Handsworth, or Coventry Road and Small Heath, those kind of roads. Interesting though, because we've got a rise in right-wing politics at the moment, and they talk about being completely flooded by Muslims. And yes, I passed a mosque, and it was my first non-Christian place of worship that I passed on the whole route. But at the same time, I passed 4 or 5 churches, and they were often from some of the more colourful denominations. So there was an Anglican church, but there was like the Redeemed Christian Church of God, and there was one, I think it was called the Tabernacle or something like that. And yeah, I mean, some of those kind of churches, but also some of the more traditional out there denominations, like the Christadelphians. They had a place. I went to visit them years ago when I did my journalism thing, where I visited all the different denominations in Stoke, and they were completely off the scale, but very friendly. So yeah, that was that. And I walked through, I guess, a very different England than the England that I've seen for the rest of the walk. And I almost ended the walk by going into an eatery and having a butter paneer. And it was incredible. And then, of course, I was into the very centre of Reading. Now, I should have ended my pilgrimage at Reading Abbey, but the time for the train was short, so I had to be quick to get it. And also, I've been to Reading Abbey before. And I will go to Reading Abbey when I pick up the Way of St. James. So, I will link it all up. But Reading Abbey is... it was one of the major houses during the Middle Ages, and there was a hand of St. James of Santiago fame, and that's why it's the Way of St. James, because it's associated with him because one of his relics was there. So that's why Reading was so important, was so holy back in the day. But I have to admit, I didn't go to the Abbey this time. And so that was my walk, and not a lot to report on that day, but looking back, what can I say about St. Frideswide's Way? Well, it's not my first pilgrimage in Britain, in that I did do a 3-day one along the Llyn Peninsula, walking to Bardsey Island. That was my first long-distance walking pilgrimage. It is my first one in England where I've covered a considerable difference. So yeah, I once walked 8 miles from like Wells Cathedral to Glastonbury, and I've done chunks of the Two Saints Way, which goes from Chester to Lichfield. But this was my first dedicated long distance pilgrimage in England. It is a very, very different experience to walking in Spain or Italy. The infrastructure is not there. I think I saw one sign on the entire route. The guide, which is here, this is the only guide to St. Frideswide's Way, I have to say, not overly impressed. It's clearly not been written by one person, but lots of people have submitted, and so it speaks in different voices. Like it took, certain churches, it's like, oh, we're very welcoming, whereas in others it's talking about they are very welcoming. And there are no distances, and the maps are a bit naff. So, well, the maps are non-existent, really. But the meditations are quite good, and some of the background information. There's Birinus, of course. So, there he is. We have a different saint every day. So, it's a pilgrimage route that's just starting off. I think it will get better in years to come. I think it will get more established, and it will be a far more worthwhile experience in those ways. But you know what? Like when I walked the way to Jerusalem, it's nice to be a pioneer, and it's nice to be doing something that not many people have done. And I think a big fault with this pilgrimage is the fact that it starts in Oxford Cathedral, because one of the main sites associated with St. Frideswide is Binzi, where, she had her hermitage. And I think they should add another day on, and they should start there, and the first day should be from Binzi to Oxford. That's my little hint to the organisers. Of course, having it go along the Thames path makes sense, in that's a very clear waymarked path. But there are problems, not least of all that it was flooded for, 3 of my 5 days, and for the other 2 it was so muddy it was impassable in parts. But also, and this is a little bugbear I have with a lot of Caminos. I mean, the Italian one is another one, the Camino di Francisco di Assisi, is that Camino mappers out. I don't know, is that a word? The people who make them, they assume you don't want to go on the roads and you want to go through fields and over mountains. And actually, like, the medieval pilgrims would have gone through the villages. They probably wouldn't have walked by the river. And if you go through the villages, and I understand not routing people through villages when there isn't a safe pavement, I get that, but there is for a lot of this. And so actually the route that I followed probably more akin to that which the medieval pilgrims would have followed, and you get to see more of the country. So yes, I think they should do a second edition of this, and they should give an alternative route for when it is flooded, and because it is a good one to do in the winter. And that's that. Big problems with it is the cost. I mean, I looked at accommodation costs and they were just crazy. I mean, thankfully I didn't have to pay them because I stayed with Alex, but also the costs of, like I say, I mentioned the gastropubs, but even like, coffee shops are really expensive in this part of the world. It ain't a cheap deal, and that's that. On the positive, the pavements along the roads, brilliant that there are so many pavements, and really good bus services. Don't say that often in Britain, but really good bus services and rail services. So when you've got to the end of the day, if you have brought the car and you need to go back, you can do that quite easily. So that's that. That is the end of St. Frideswide's Way. I wasn't excited about doing it, but I did it at a very particular time in my life when I probably needed that headspace, both when I was in the middle of the caring, but also now after, to sort of get my head straight. And some of the musings and the meditations that I've had on this pilgrimage have been really, really intense. So, not a wasted experience at all. But that is it. I'd like to thank Alex for putting me up. Great guy. And I'd also, I guess, like to thank Philip Pullman, because for some reason that famous atheist has been my pilgrimage companion, and his books have, given it a lot more meaning than it would have had without them. So there we are. That's me, Uncle Travelling Matt, saying thanks for watching. Keep travelling. Stay on the path, as I intend to when I come back later to talk about my walking along the way of St. James. Be seeing you.